Hi, everyone. I guess we don't have a sense of, or can't see you all directly, but excited to interact with you all after this conversation and in the networking sessions as well. We're really excited about this topic. It's been really top of mind for the past year or so since, like many of you, I've dived deep into the Web3 rabbit hole in the last year. So really excited to chat with you all. And I'm very honored to be given this opportunity to chat alongside Nick, who's really been a thought leader in this space and in Web3 before it was cool. So would love to maybe kick off with just intros on our end, just to give you all a little bit of an introduction to who we are, what we invest in, and kind of what we look for on a very high level. So.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Dukoff. I'm based in Boston. I'm a 2 times founder. One company was in Edtech, and I was previously a vice president at Northeastern University, as well as I taught entrepreneurship at John Cabot University in Rome, Italy. And now I'm a venture capital partner at G20 Ventures here in Boston, and we do seed investing in B2B SaaS and Web3 companies.
Cool. And I apologize, maybe my Wi-Fi was a little bit laggy just now, but I'm Claire. I'm a VP with GSV Ventures. I've been with the team for a little over 2 years now and have historically split my time across our summit as well as our investment team. I've always been fascinated by education and decided to pursue a master's in ed. And so that's kind of my view into this world. My window into Web3 was really, I think, in the past year, like many others, I think, in this space, there was really kind of an unlock for me in utility and being able to see the applications for education. So I've been leading the charge on Web3 investments for GSV, as well as a bunch of other verticals as well. But we're primarily an EdTech focused fund. So this is kind of our angle towards it, early stage focus, and primarily seed Series A investments, and look at education, upskilling, future of work, as well as Web3 powered EdTech. So cool. I guess we could level set maybe with just the state of Web3 EdTech. I think I saw in the comments actually that someone had mentioned that they were surprised by the amount that poured into, or amount of capital invested in EdTech recently. And I think it's interesting because education as a whole has been, I think, historically not seen as like a tech comparable sector to invest in. Even when you kind of look at the public sector, a lot of times EdTech isn't, the multiples that are attached to them aren't necessary, or placed with them aren't necessarily at a tech level. And so it's interesting because we've obviously, all of you deep in the education space, have seen the relevance of education accelerating during the pandemic, and now post-pandemic, we're in a new world of understanding education. So I think the number of EdTech investments total in the past year was about 11 billion, but crypto obviously is a completely different story. And I think there's been a lot of investment this past year, a lot of also, I think, new funds that are specifically crypto focused, and maybe Nick, I'll hand it off to you to maybe talk a little bit more about the crypto investment space.
Yeah, so obviously crypto has been around since the Bitcoin white paper, which at this point now is well over a decade ago, but the space really has only matured over the past few years in terms of venture capital backed companies being able to operate at an interesting scale. We're still so early. The data point that I always share is in 1997, there was 30 some odd million AOL users. And today in Web3, there's 30 million some odd active wallets. So, we're in 1997 of Web3. It's still super early. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the excitement and energy, because if Web3 plays out how many of us think it will, it can be, as important of an impact on society as the internet was. Of course, only made possible because of the internet.
Yeah, and I think why this is important, alongside kind of the convergence of education, is that, overall, I think the pandemic has driven a lot of shifts towards you know, a multiple variables that make education ripe for disruption with Web3 technology. So I think one thing that specifically is near and dear, or I've been really interested in, is just the rise of alternative schooling models that you're seeing in just Web2 education alone, whether that's micro schooling models or the rise of, I think just the amount of optionality that there is now in a post-pandemic world, and people now seeing that, online schooling isn't the for the outlier, but now a new normal, or a new normal option. And so Web3, thinking about ways on a high level, the philosophy behind Web3 and the way to decentralize education, I think that convergence is really exciting. And that's why we're excited about investing in this space. Yeah. Any other key thoughts, Nick, before I go to the next slide?
No, I think that's all great points. And there's all sorts of new, interesting potential for ways that Web3 can help enable more students to be able to afford to learn on the blockchain. And we'll talk about some of the things that we're seeing that may enable that education, learn to earn, and other models as well.
Yeah. So we put together this slide for you all, which hopefully gives you a preview. It's definitely doesn't encompass everything that's in the space, and there's definitely things that we've missed. So would love to, hear any thoughts or reactions to this. If there are any companies you all are seeing or building yourselves, we'd love to make sure they're included. But here's a kind of high level overview of a lot of the companies we've seen, and grouping them into, I guess, 5 big categories of the different types. Obviously, there are a lot of companies that overlap into each other. So for example, something like the proof of learn obviously upskills a lot of people. So they would sit between online learning and workforce and skills. But here's just a high level overview of how to think about a lot of these companies that are coming into the space at this early stage.
Claire, maybe we can talk about, some specific examples.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'll kick off with maybe the most metaverse related one, which is around learning environments. I think obviously, since we're talking about Web3 and Ed3, that encompasses both blockchain tech. So we'll get to that. But on the metaverse front, I think people have always been excited about the future of putting education in a virtual world. Obviously, education or the move for education to become edtech has historically just been a very simple transfer of what content exists in the Web2 world content exists physically in textbooks into a digital format. So that's, I think, was really exciting and increased access for a lot of people. It meant that, we could now consume content virtually, but that also meant that content was very passive and that there wasn't ways to engage with people learning that same content. And so now with the rise of metaverse spaces and communities, and I guess this ties a little bit into learning DAOs as well, you're seeing the rise of, I think, going a step beyond traditional ed tech, which is just like passive education content that gets released to you as a learner. You're starting to see, I think, these, not only the infrastructure to learn alongside other people, but actually experience it in the exact same way that we're experiencing it now in this conference, being able to be in a shared space, to transfer easily between our physical worlds and our virtual worlds. And so we're seeing this across K-12 as well as higher ed and workforce. We didn't include that many workforce metaverses, but on the K-12 front, seeing a lot of K-12 specific metaverses where you have the guardrails for learning, and then spaces where students can create small group communities and cohorts and learn after school with each other. Another interesting phenomenon we're seeing is just around universities really thinking about building digital twins out. I think the traditional university obviously places a lot of value on creating brand and such, but I think especially as we move towards a place or a world where not everyone has to go to a physical institution because, universities are traditionally limited in access because they're time bound and place bound. So people like student parents or people who may not be close to a university don't get access to that world. And so now thinking about the ways that university education or credentialed education can be distributed through metaverse spaces is also really exciting.
Maybe I'll talk a little bit about, since Claire covered learning environments and workforce and skills assessment and credentialing. So I'll just talk about 3 of the companies listed here because I think they each do different things and are really great examples of how the blockchain can be used to validate what somebody has learned, as well as what somebody can demonstrate that they've learned. So Rabbit Hole is a company where you can go through quests in decentralized applications, doing various activities, whether it be decentralized finance or voting in a governance proposal in a DAO. And for those activities, once you've done them and signed with your wallet that you've done those activities, Rabbit Hole awards you with a credential that they verify by seeing the activities you've taken on the blockchain. And then your credential also lives on the blockchain. 101 is taking a bit of a different approach, which is really interesting. And I saw Tim here in the metaverse. But what 101 is doing, they've built a LMS where you can create content as well as create check your knowledge type assessments. And that if you pass the assessment, you then get awarded with tokens, an NFT, validating that you've indeed kind of passed that assessment. And then that NFT can be used in any variety of ways to demonstrate what you've learned or grant you access into certain portions of a particular community. And then Get POAP as the third and final example is connecting your off-chain work with on-chain credentials. So imagine being a software developer and, in the ordinary course of your work, contributing code to a GitHub repository that then gets, pushed to production. All of that activity can be seen via the GitHub API if the repository manager grants access. And what Get POAP does is it awards POAPs, which we actually have a POAP for everyone who's attending today. And a POAP is just another name essentially for an NFT. It grants you a POAP or NFT representing your code contributions to a particular software project. So these are just 3 examples that are all very different and equally exciting around bringing your work and education achievements onto the blockchain.
Yeah, and another one to just add around, I think the future of what work looks like around credentialing as well, that I'm particularly excited about is just things around, or companies that are building around what the future of work looks like. So one that comes to mind is Polywork, is another platform I think that really represents maybe the flaws of how we think about work today. And so I think for a lot of us, we've all been through the LinkedIn experience of having a resume, and that all that encompasses is like, I was an analyst at blah, I was an engineer at blah, but really it doesn't really show how multifaceted we are as people. And so I think touching on a little bit of what Nick mentioned around some of these credentialing platforms and capturing just how extracurricular our work is really interesting. And so I think what we'll see with Web3 tech is a convergence of not just being, one-dimensional in your work. You're not just tied to one job. You're going to see, I think, a future where your participation in certain DAOs will be represented in your digital, whether that's a backpack or a digital wallet, your extracurriculars, things that may not necessarily be captured in a resume will now be built into just this very holistic view of everything you do and everything you've learned and everything you've contributed towards, which I think is a really exciting future. Just thinking about how that translates into even finding, I think one of the biggest issues, in addition to many that exist across the pre-K to grade spectrum, is just the inability to match talent. There's so much talent out there, but and on the flip side, you're seeing an inability to hire for many companies. And it's just because there's this massive disconnect in finding and matching skills. And so the power of Web3 to really streamline that matching of skills is really exciting.
And just to give an example of like how one of these companies is doing that, Brain Trust, which is a really interesting model that actually has a nonprofit kind of parent and then a token-based DAO that governs the protocol. You have to hold tokens and then stake those tokens in order to apply for jobs on Brain Trust, which actually helps validate that you are who you say you are, and kind of also kind of put money at risk in terms of validating that identity on the blockchain. And then similarly, the employers on the protocol also have to use tokens to post their listings so that they're higher qualified, where they're really actively seeking candidates and hiring, not just folks who kind of post roles and leave them open just to kind of keep the resume flow coming in. So that's just one example of a way that companies are doing what Claire was describing.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note, though, at least on maybe the enterprise and skills side, having, I think, been familiar with a lot of Web2 enterprise or upskilling companies that serve companies that are primarily still in a Web2 mindset, is that I think this problem has obviously been a massive one for just CHROs and CLOs. How do we really break down our workforce into competency-based skills or blocks of skills? But I do want to note that I think being able to translate something very qualitative into a quantitative skill is something I think, at least for me, I feel like I still struggle with in understanding how we do that. But obviously, I think Nick can touch on this, but just the rise of verifiable credentials and there's so much advancement in this space. I think the biggest thing for me with anything that's building in the space, whether it's serving higher ed institutions or bridging higher ed institutions with workforce, is just how do you work with these existing institutions? Just, how do you get them on board with using this as their default system, just given how much they've had to experiment with, I think learner employer records and such. So.
And just to give you a sense of, Claire opened by giving some stats about the size of the relative markets, both EdTech and Web3. But the intersection of these two markets, while we would hope it would be larger, is still quite small. Just to give you a sense of the companies that we had listed in terms of, at least off the top of my head, a few that have raised a good bit of money. Brain Trust has raised $100 million in their last round. I know Proof of Learn has announced, I think, around $15 million. BuildSpace today announced 10 million. I was an angel investor in the company. And then there's a bunch that have announced, more modest seed rounds, in the range of like 2 to 5 million. Rabbit Hole, GitPoApp, Super High. I'm just looking on here. I think Twali, Station, and maybe a couple Continuum and a couple others. But we're talking about really only 3-4 companies in the entire kind of Web3 EdTech space that have raised $10 million or more. And Claire, remind me the total number of just EdTech dollars raised this past year.
It's around 11 billion.
Yeah, so we're talking about cumulatively, maybe of that 11 billion, 100 some odd million of that has gone into Web3 EdTech companies. So maybe order magnitude 10%, to give you a sense of how early we are.
Yeah, it's definitely super early and would love, I think that's why we're excited about, people like yourselves building in the space, and would love to continue filling this Web3 landscape map. And I know we wanted to move towards just talking about us as investors and what we look for in a Web3 EdTech company. I don't know, Nick, if you wanted to kick off that.
Can I actually ask you a question before you guys get in that?
Yeah.
So I know that the people that are at this conference are either educators, tech founders, looking to maybe start a company. So because we know that there has been so little, relatively speaking, money invested in EdTech Web3, does that mean that there's more opportunity, or does that mean that VCs are right now not interested in taking that risk just yet because the time's not right?
Yeah, I can kick off. I think it's a little bit of both. I'm sure a lot of people who have kept track of the investing space has just heard of, I think, a series of events that make people, or have, I think there's just a general fear around crypto, which I don't think should exist, but there definitely is that sentiment among a lot of investors. So I think that plays a role, but I also think that also means that this is the time to build. There's so much white space out there, and the fact that I think the fact that that landscape that we built has so much white space should be encouraging. For one, I think just as someone who's kind of looked at investments across space, there's so much open space in K-12. I think can probably only count up to 3 or 4 investments that have been built for K-12. And even then, they haven't been built for educators. So I think there's a massive white space on how do you create a Web3 platform for educators beyond students. I think there's a lot around how do you implement DeFi in schools, which is a very, traditional system. So I think K-12 is a massive white space. I would say serving like skilling and enterprise is maybe a little bit more built out. But again, I think I think what is lacking in this space is people who do have a deep passion for education, have a deep understanding of the education system, and are able to build with that end user in mind, as opposed to just coming in and saying, this is a white space, like, let's just apply some existing model and use or Web3 tech. So I do think there's a lot of open opportunity, and with venture, you're really thinking about like 5 to 10 year timelines. So that's another big thing to keep in mind.
Did you have any more questions, Preeti?
I have so many more questions, but
Yeah,
I don't want to take up all the space.
Yeah, no, great.
Well, another question is, if you're raising as an edtech company, or if you're ideating a new idea, is it better for you to position yourself right now as an edtech company or as a Web3 company? Because what you just said, Claire, is, there is a lot of sort of like averseness to taking that risk in Web3, but it is really sexy. So like, which one do you actually go for?
Yeah, it's funny. Claire and I, when we were preparing for this presentation, EdTech has always been a hard category to raise money in. This is why there are vertical EdTech funds, because generalist VC funds, generally speaking, don't allocate a lot of their funds into the EdTech category. Each one will make a token investment or two. But unless, the partner has really done a lot of education deals, they probably are going to tend to shy away from them. And then on the Web3 side of things, Web3 focused funds have tended, at least in the kind of early days of Web3, which I think we're still in, have focused a lot on like the picks and shovels, protocols, kind of more of the deep tech stuff within Web3. Haven't really gotten to like the application layer yet as much. And so if you're at that intersection of Web3 and EdTech, it's like hard to go to the generalist fund because it's got education and Web3. It's kind of hard to go to the Web3 funds because it's got EdTech. It's hard to go to the EdTech funds because it's got Web3, as Claire was mentioning. But you know what? I've been a founder, and you just got to go to all of them and just keep knocking on those doors. And if what you're building is awesome, somebody's going to see it and want to invest.
Yeah, and if I might add, I guess the EdTech investor POV, I actually do think in full transparency, depending on the fund you're pitching, and typically you would do this in regardless of what space you're building in, is really, I think, tweaking your pitch a little bit depending on who you're pitching to. So I think obviously a crypto fund will dig a lot deeper into tokenomics, and an education fund will look a lot more at impact and outcomes. So I think being able to know what you want to go deeper on in your pitch to an investor, depending on what they're more focused on. And then specifically, I think for EdTech investors, a big thing for us is we're really excited about the tech, but at the end of the day, I think we care about, we don't have the value add to support, I think, or I best way to put it is I think we want to support something that has a true need for an education investor. And so if you're going to an EdTech investor, I think it's important to make it clear how they can add value. Because I do think we've seen cases where, there's so much money flowing into crypto. We also want to be a value add and be able to share expertise and how do you build in the education world. And so I think making that clear is also important when you're pitching EdTech investors.
So we've got a question from the metaverse. AGM asks, of the companies that you have seen receiving funding, what percentage are using it in ways that really reimagine the relationship between education provider and students and other stakeholders? That's a really good question. I don't have the slide up in front of me anymore, but there are a few that are doing pretty interesting things. I don't want to pump my own bags too much, but there's a few that I'm very familiar with that I think are doing pretty interesting things. Proof of Learn is building a tuition staking model where you actually get repaid what you put in for tuition, so that the student comes out once they complete the program not having paid for the education. And it's really interesting because it's aligning the incentives of completion with, paying back that tuition. So it's like, sometimes you may have seen at your gym, like in January, they'll say, like, if you come 5 days, like we'll give you your money back for January, to try to kind of get people in the, spirit of working out at the beginning of the year. It's that same kind of motivational and economic incentive alignment, to in this case, learn. And then SuperHigh is doing something pretty interesting in that they're using Web3 to provide educators with more ownership within kind of a shared community-based decision-making process. Those are just two examples, but there are interesting models that we're seeing. AGM, thanks for your question. As far as percentage goes, I'd like to think that, anyone brave and crazy enough to build a Web3 Edtech is really reimagining a lot about how educators and students and the workforce can all interact with one another.
Amazing. Do you guys want to close it out? And then I will talk about the next session.
Yeah, I guess really, I think hopefully this has been really helpful for you all. I know there are probably some follow-up questions or things that we honestly may have missed. And if you would like to debate or discuss, we're always open to that. I think Nick maybe dropped his Twitter on there. I'll drop mine. Would love to continue the discussion after this and have it be an ongoing discussion. And would also love to hear your perspectives on, challenges if you're a builder or, educator, what you see lacking in this space. And yeah, it's been awesome getting to chat through this, and excited for the future of this space as well.
And for those of you on YouTube that may not be able to see in the metaverse, I'm at Nick Dukoff on Twitter, NickDucoff. And if you tweet at me, I'll send you a link to get a free NFT for joining our talk tonight. And Claire, if you want to just voice over your Twitter handles for the folks that
I am just Claire JYZ. And yeah, make sure to get the pub because that'll be really cool.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was super informative. I learned a lot. I'm really excited for you guys to be here and continue sort of answering questions. So folks, that was the end of our Ed Talks for today. Now we're going to actually start our learning labs and our masterminds. So there are 10 learning labs happening at the same time in 15 minutes. So it is 7:15 p.m. ET right now. And so we have a 15-minute break. So go ahead and make some friends, talk to a vendor, check out our NFT gallery, and then go ahead over to your learning lab of choice. And it's a first come, first serve learning lab. So you could just walk in with your avatar. I'll see you there. Thank you guys so much. See you soon.